So this is a quick note before I get into the video. You were watching part 2 of a 2-part series talking about my psychotic break and how it brought me to a diagnosis of schizoaffective disorder. If you haven't seen part 1, well, part 2 might not make much sense, so I'll link it up here in the cards for you to go and watch the first part of this video before you come back and watch the second part. The final note is that in terms of triggering content for this video, I do focus heavily on religious delusions, so if that's triggering for you, go watch another video. I still love you anyway. And just do it safe for you. Anyways, here's the rest of the story of how I got diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder. I really bought into it because of course it was a delusion. That's the thing about delusions, is you believe them. And as a result, I firmly believed I had no choice in who I was to answer to. And the thing is, this thing took over my entire life. I couldn't get away from it. And I kept believing it and believing it and believing it to the point where it got so intense and so big that I could no longer ignore it at all. Every day I would wake up, I would make my coffee, I would listen to the noise, I would feel that anger, I would struggle through my EMT classes, I would self-harm when it got too much, I had a drink or 2 or 3 or 4, anything to make the voices in my head just shut up. And it was just this hell of just wake up, do things, go to sleep. At one point I was up for 3 days, I don't even remember, but I was just hallucinating constantly, and it was this like nightmarish horror movie, and just the anger and the fear, so much fear in all of this. And even just talking about it brings me back to just how awful it was. I mean, good Lord, I'd go to sleep like, good Lord, I'd go to sleep just shaking because I was just so afraid and so alone in all of it. And I just remember wondering like what would he do next? What horrible fresh hell would be waiting for me the next day? And the thing is, I isolated myself from everyone, and I wouldn't always be in my Tiffany box of a room. Sometimes I'd be on the train or at Rockefeller Center or just walking the streets of Manhattan. But I remember getting to the point where the things that were happening to me were so serious and borderline ridiculous that I knew no one would believe me if I told them. And the thing is, like, if they're not going to believe me, then why would I say anything? And so, yeah, isolation became the name of the game I was playing with myself. So language warning for this next little bit. I remember writing in my journal a lot, and many times, many times I wrote in those entries, if this is real, I'm fucked. And if it's not real, I'm fucked. And both of those options seemed equally horrible to me. I remember thinking that either option was awful, and I was basically in a no-win situation. And then one night, everything changed. The God showed up and told me that the people I cared about weren't going to die. The screaming in my head calmed down enough, and I was elated, and things were suddenly better. Maybe everything was gonna be okay. Maybe this God I worshipped had actually not been this terrible thing. Maybe he was the Christian God that cared about his people after all. Maybe everything was okay and better now. I was free, I was happy, I was elated, and I thanked the delusion for doing what it had done. I thanked it for setting me free from this awful hell of what my brain had turned into. I was like, maybe everything's gonna be okay. The people I love get to live. Like, they get to live. I don't have to lose them. I mean, I started crying. I started crying. I was so happy. Like, I was elated and thankful and grateful and hopeful that everything was gonna be okay in the end. Like, all the pain I went through, none of it mattered. And then without warning, it all slammed back into place. The delusion that the people I loved were going to die came back stronger than before. The noise in my head became louder. And in a voice that I will never forget, as long as I live, said, I'm not the one you should be afraid of. And then, you couldn't convince me otherwise in the moment, I firmly believed that the devil himself was in my bedroom. There were 2 demons crawling on the wall. While I didn't visually hallucinate, you could not tell me that there was not a demon in my room. And I got this feeling that the God I had worshipped was just sitting there watching and laughing while I'm sitting there being thrown to the wolves, essentially. And it was just this horrible, all-encompassing thought of, what did I do to attract his attention? Meaning the devil's attention. Was I really that bad in everything I'd done? Had I really screwed up that badly that I deserved to have that happen to me? I felt utterly betrayed, a deep, deep level of betrayal. And it was all encompassing and it was horrible. And the whole event, I mean, honestly, something broke, something snapped, something absolutely shattered in me that night. There is a divide because of this. There is before this happened and after it happened. That's the divide of my entire life, is that night. And out of absolute sheer terror, I went catatonic. Could not move, could not speak, couldn't do anything. I was just frozen on my bed. And I was still acutely aware that the devil was in my room and there were demons on my walls. Demons. Like, what? And the God I worship was just standing there watching, not interfering. I prayed for him to save me, but what was the point when he had just left me there with the... It's horrible. It was horrible. I mean, what else do you do in that situation? Where do you go? What's supposed to happen? And so things got a little fuzzy, and I would kind of spend a lot of time in a dissociative catatonic blur, for lack of a better term. And eventually, after some time, the devil and his demons left. Eventually, I was able to move again. Eventually, I got up off the mattress on the floor and continued to live, and things were different then. I was a different person. I still am a different person. And that anger that my God had towards me, well, it no longer fazed me. I was just exhausted and tired and beaten down and shattered. And keep in mind, this whole time I needed help. I knew I needed it. And so I floated through days after that, maybe in a fugue state. I was told that I would make entire meals and never eat them. And eventually the noise calmed down and went away. And eventually the God kind of backed off a little bit. And eventually the death threats and stuff calmed down too, to a point where things were more manageable. They were still there, but they were manageable. And the thing is, my mixed state had also calmed down too, so I wasn't going up and down with my emotions as much as I had before, which was a welcome relief. But I called my psychiatrist, who was states away from me at this point. I told him everything that had happened, the death premonitions, the religious stuff, and everything, and he put me on Zyprexa, which is a very powerful antipsychotic medication. And he diagnosed me based off my manic episode and the psychotic symptoms I was experiencing as bipolar 1 with psychotic features. And I realized then that it wasn't all real, that none of it was real. And I didn't know how to feel about that, because that psychotic break was my life. It was my everything. It was how I lived. It was what I ate and what I breathed. It was all-encompassing. It was everything I did revolved around those hallucinations and those delusions. And even though it was terrifying, I just had such a hard time thinking that it wasn't real. It was fake. It was literally something my brain just made up because of a chemical imbalance. Like, are you kidding me? So in the midst of this awful feeling of like being, I don't know, led down a path of a lie, I was also mad that the lie, that I'd believed it. Like, why didn't I logically talk my way out of it? And that's the nature of psychosis, is that you can't separate reality from the psychosis sometimes. When even logically looking back on it, knowing it was psychosis the entire time, knowing it wasn't real, I still, you hear the sirens, they're coming to get me. All of it not being real was a really hard thing to grasp, because it was like my life had been turned upside down again. And the more I was on Zyprexa, the more things disappeared. The delusions went away, the God went away, the noise in my head stayed away, and my friends that I'd had in my head for the last many, many, many years, they also went away. And my brain kind of became the most normal it ever been, especially since the Zyprexa also stabilized my moods. Like, I wasn't manic anymore and I wasn't depressed anymore. I was euthymic, meaning just neutral mood. And the thing is, I actually had to relearn how to live, like how to live without the psychosis that had been in my life for so long. And that was hard. That was really, really hard. And yes, I was relieved that no one actually died. That was a great relief, but it was still hard to get used to not having that thought in my head all the time, not having the weight of it on my shoulders. And you're probably thinking by now, like, hey, where does Schizoaffective come into play, Kit? Like, what's going on with that? And it's really anticlimactic, actually, because about a year after I was diagnosed with bipolar 1, I was sitting in my psychiatrist's office and I told him, I was like, yeah, the voices in my head that I've been hearing for years, they never went away. They were there even when I wasn't in an episode. And that is one of the defining criteria of schizoaffective disorder, is having psychotic symptoms in the absence of mood episodes for a period of 2 weeks or longer. And so he diagnosed me with schizoaffective disorder, and I've had that ever since. And that's it. That's how I got diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder. I had a true psychotic break, and it was bad enough to warrant that diagnosis. And I want you guys to know that this is the hardest video I've ever filmed. The fact that it's even out there and you're watching it is kind of wild to me, because I've already told the camera things that I haven't even told real people. And because of that, I want to thank you for listening to me. I want to thank you for watching this video, watching my videos. And I want you guys to know that if you're experiencing something like what I just described, you're not alone. I'm not alone. And I made this channel to let people know that they aren't alone, that they're not alone in their struggles, even if they choose to remain silent about them to their friends and family and everybody. Like, those that struggle in silence, like, I am here for you. You are not alone. But if you are more vocal and are open to sharing your story, I would absolutely love to hear it. I have a comment section, of course, below this video, but if that's too public for you, I am on Schizogram. Wow. I am on Instagram with @SchizoKitzo. And you can always talk to me there. Send me a DM. I will listen to you, because honestly, hearing you guys' stories helps validate my own. And like I've been saying a lot in this little outro bit, it helps me feel less alone. And that's it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Like, subscribe, comment, all that. And if you don't want to do that, that's okay too. But either way, have a good day, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.